Hello and welcome back to TOS Tutorial. This week I'm continuing to give a brief overview to the lore, aesthetics, and feel for all the allegiances and commanders in the game. This week we're moving on to those from the brand new first expansion, Beyond the Other Side. This book contains 4 allegiances: 3 Kingdoms, Kimon, the Guild, and Court of Two. The 3 Kingdoms is made up of China, Japan, and Vietnam, all of whom recently fought for independence from the Guild. This is a military alliance only, as they have some old grudges against each other still. However, they've accepted that they're stronger together, and there's just too many threats on their doorstep to deal with each other right now. Aesthetically, they're an interesting mix of styles from each of China, Japan, and Vietnam. Their units' fashions clearly come from distinct cultures, making an exciting variety of styles on display. In-game, the 3 Kingdoms' answer to all of their opponents' questions is no. They're very denial-oriented and beat their opponents by shutting down their favorite tricks. When the 3 Kingdoms is on the board, their opponent's forced to play the game they tell them to. We don't know yet which of their commanders is in the Allegiance box, but I'm betting it's Zhangwei. He's a lead from the front kind of support, handing out lots of inspired tokens, even if it means a bit of friendly fire. He's also really interesting in melee, as he can throw damage at any enemy fire team he can see. Liên Nguyêt is the fierce, determined heart of Vietnam's forces. She and her customized Convinu are a jack-of-all-trades unit. She brings strong and accurate melee attacks and ways to cleanse her forces of bad tokens, and is backed by powerful denial abilities. Her Komainu brings a powerful missile action and several protection tricks. The Kimon come from a place called the Beyond, which is pretty much hell. Time and space don't work right there, and it's overflowing with magic, but basically nothing else. Even dying is meaningless there, because they only just come back eventually. They've recently been released onto Earth thanks to Zhong Kui's scheming, and they're delighted to have a release from their eternal monotony, and something new to conquer. Aesthetically, the Kimon are a wide variety of beastly and humanoid Asian-inspired demons. These include Shinshō, who is a fox-like kitsune, Tatarigami, which are living hurricanes, and Gyuki, giant spiders with ox heads. The Kimon play exactly like you'd imagine a bunch of Oni too, with brute force. Their immense natural strength means every blow is a threat to even heavily armored foes, but they have low armor since death is just a nuisance to them. Each of their commanders can also drain power from their own units to summon more Oni to join the fight. Zhong Kui is the Kimon's Allegiance Box commander, and he's their #1 summoner. He can use his Demon Bag for a short-range place on nearby friends or enemies, and is decent at melee and range. Most importantly, he has 3 Kimon units he can summon in, compared to all of the other commanders, 2 each. Takiyasha doesn't care too much about this whole tactics thing. She leads through terrifying strength instead. She's extremely dangerous in melee, able to throw out a ton of high-strength hits against enemies foolish enough to be engaged by her. Her Gamma OG mount helps with this, as it can shoot out its tongue to drag enemies over to her. The Guild of Mercantilers are based in Vienna. They've dominated the world with a tyrannical grip for centuries now through their control over the world's soulstone supply, but lately more and more of the Earth nations have been declaring independence and fighting them off. Now they're sweet-talking their way back into those nations, with plans to crush them back into line later. There's not a lot to say about their aesthetics at the moment, since they have so few models and they're so disparate in style. But what they do have are essentially hardened soldiers in red coats and an assortment of mages. On the board, the guilds show that they're the richest allegiance by throwing resources at the problem until it goes away. They have the best healing in the game, able to reinforce more often than anyone else. They can also move anytime they gain an inspired token, making them really hard to pin down. They're very ranged focused though, and they don't really like to be in melee. Sonnia Criid is the guild's only commander currently, and comes in the starter box. She has effortless resource gain, doesn't need line of sight to blast her enemies, and is the strongest area attacker in the game. In Glory, she has one of the most terrifying morale actions, able to do damage into everything in a huge radius. The Court of Two is a shadowy organization started by a doppelganger from Malifaux named Anton de Wills. He sells his organization's services out to cause chaos around Earth, and manipulates entire nations into fulfilling his secret agendas politically. He's allied his organization with 2 powerful necromancers, which has greatly improved what his organization is able to do. Aesthetically, the Court of Two is all about ghosts. All but their commander wear masks, which are what the court leaders use to bind these spirits and force them to stay on Earth and obey their leaders. The court is all about gaining and spending reinforcement tokens, and throwing expendable units at the enemy until they win. Their power is very centralized, with extremely strong named characters, but fragile squads. Kirai Ankoku leads the Court of Two in the starter box, and like Sonnia is currently this allegiance's only commander. She's extremely support-oriented, pulsing out massive amounts of reinforcement tokens, reinforcing several units at once, and summoning in more squads. She also comes with her other self, Ikirio, who's like a guided missile of hatred and razor-sharp claws. Next, let's move on to this book's dual allegiance commanders, including 2 that pair in with some of the last book's allegiances. The Kitsune Shinshō is all about domination and mind control. He has ways to give himself tons of inspired tokens, and uses his Kitsune Tsuki to force the enemy to attack their friends. This makes him especially strong against any enemy foolish enough to bring an elite squad against him. He can even disrupt his enemy's tactics tokens and rip his victims out of glory to give that glory to one of his allies. Both of his allegiances love the interference he brings. Reo Edwards is a slightly less than legitimate English Navy captain, specializing in both short to mid-range gunfights and scavenging cards from his discard pile to reuse them. Most importantly, he can see the enemy's stratagem deck to know what they have planned and steal one of their stratagems for himself. The resources and intel that he provides are valuable to everyone he fights with. Lastly, there's Kawatora, the Great Turtle Oni. He specializes in defensive support, making it hard for his opponents to kill nearby friendly units. His River's Medicine lets him both remove unpleasant tokens and reinforce his allies. He can also turn his engagement range into a mobile tide pool. Both of his allegiances are relatively fragile, and so they appreciate the staying power he can provide. And that's everyone. I'd love to say we'll cover the second expansion next week, but since the first one only just released, it's probably going to be a while. Instead, I'm going to start doing deeper dives into what each of the allegiances actually has right now. I'll start with the two smallest, the ones in the starter box, since in my opinion pretty much every player should be grabbing them at some point. Until then, happy gaming!